Today my presentation focused upon this new concept of Greater Eurasia. What is this Greater Eurasia concept? So the concept itself reflects, I think, Russian thinking that the Chinese rise in Eurasia is now so formidable that it needs to be accommodated. What I see now in the Greater Eurasia concept is an acknowledgement that Russia doesn't feel as if it can actually interface with China on equal footing, and it's now acknowledging that Chinese investment, Chinese proposals, Chinese infrastructure upgrades in Eurasia are now an essential part of the economic landscape. And it's presenting these Chinese initiatives as if they are in Russian interest. The second point driving this is that Russia's relations with the West continue to remain tense. Russia continues to look for geopolitical and geoeconomic architectures that can position itself against NATO, the West, the European Union, and integrating Greater Eurasia is another way of doing that. And then third, within this Greater Eurasia, you have a number of non-Western regional organizations, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Belt and Road, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Russia supports all of these regional organizations in its quest to establish a non-Western global governance, to slowly change the international order from being led by the United States and the West to what it calls a more polycentric world. And many of these regional organizations can produce connections and coordinate with each other. That's the third pillar of this. There's, I think, a fundamental tension in the Greater Eurasia concept, and that's over the division of labor between Russia and China in the region. China's role as an investor, as a public goods provider, is forcing it to confront issues of political influence and political decisions that it wants in terms of its largesse in the region. So, two issues I talked about in my talk. One is, what are the likely political and social consequences of large-scale Chinese-backed infrastructure projects being introduced in the region? China hopes, and in some cases assumes, that the more infrastructure you fund, the more economic development that you have, and that more economic development is good for political stability. That might be true in certain cases at certain times. But what if introducing and funding large infrastructure projects instead brings distributional conflicts? What if it encourages elite rent-seeking? What if it exacerbates existing ethnic conflicts and regional tensions over who gets access and why? So these are the issues China faces when it comes to funding highways, railways, pipelines, power grids. How is it going to handle these highly indebted countries when they can't repay Chinese loans? What's the Chinese position going to be? Are they going to forgive the debt the way that they did in Africa? Are they going to demand more equity, more shares of, say, natural resources or natural gas or energy in exchange for these debt payments? Because if it does that, then it faces a political and social backlash in a lot of these countries. The final way I think this division of labor is being challenged is that far from China just doing economics, China is now very much promoting its security interests in the region. Traditionally, it's done this through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and bilateral cooperation, mostly with the internal security services of a lot of individual Central Asian countries. But now we see China in negotiations for access and base-like arrangements with neighboring countries. So there have been reports of negotiations with Afghanistan for China to set up a military facility or training center in the Wakhan corridor. Reports that it is sponsoring and funding border outposts with Tajikistan and then confirmations of a Chinese military facility, a naval facility in the Pakistan port of Gwadar. In this case, relations with Tajikistan, relations with Afghanistan, relations with Pakistan, you have negotiations over Chinese military access in all three of these countries. And again, this signifies a turn from what used to be a very low-key approach to security to a more visible and active role for Chinese troops in the region.